Good morning. I'm very happy to start this workshop 126, and I would like to welcome you here to say you Jumbo. And this workshop will be about ICTs, practically, vulnerable people and the participation in the public life. So my name is Julia Morinets. I'm from the civil society organization Together Against Cybercrime. We are based in Strasbourg in France. And what we do is we try to develop a number of projects in order to promote the cybersecurity culture. So I'm very happy to be here and to have an honor to co-moderate this workshop with my colleague, Mr. Wolf Ludwig. So I would like to thank him for this. So, Wolf, do you... So basically the title of our workshop is the use of ICTs by vulnerable people for the better participation in the public life. Yes?
Yes.
Ali,
okay. Thanks, Julia. Just a few remarks regarding the conduct of this workshop today. We will have a number of introductory statements and presentations. We will try our best to keep them as short and precise as possible, around 5 minutes each. And afterwards we will open the floor for discussion with all participants. And as we are already quite some minutes behind our original time schedule, let me suggest to hand over to Julia to shortly talk about the main objectives of this workshop, and then we will start with presentations.
Yes, practically the main objectives that we stated that we would like to propose you to discuss today, it's what are the main vulnerable people, what categories of vulnerable people we have, what vulnerable people and the categories of these vulnerable people we can find in different regions, in different countries and in different continents even. What are the ICTs initiatives that were developed in these different countries and continents? And actually how we can better assist these people. It will be about our discussion, but also it will be very interesting to see concerning these initiatives that were developed, how we can share experiences practically, how we can implement these initiatives in other countries. So in order to start, and I see all our panelists here, so now we can really start. Yeah. In order to start our discussions, we have around the table a number of experienced persons who worked with the question of and with the issue of vulnerable people in the area of ICTs, but from different perspectives. I would like to start then with the introductory message from Mr. Henri Malos, who is the acting president of the employees group of the European Economic and Social Committee. So Mr. Malos was unable to attend this meeting today, but he sent us a recorded message and he gave us all the support of the employees group. So I would like now to watch with you and to discuss afterwards concerning this message.
My name is Henri Malos. I am a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, which is a body, an institution in the European Union, which represents the civil society. We are 344, coming from all parts of 27 member states of the European Union, and coming from all parts of various interests, including employers. I am the actual president of the employers, trade unions, that means workers, people engaged in trade unions, and various representatives of NGOs of a civil society. But we are an institution and we are concerned by the European Union, Parliament and Commission on all matters and on all proposals. So we are very honored and very privileged to have been invited today to address you and to address this audience on this Internet Governance Forum, mainly because this was a request by our friends who are acting and promoting fight against cybercrime, and I would like to address my personal thanks and also my personal support to their fight and to their action. So why are we engaged in this battle? We are engaged in this battle because on one hand, we think that Internet, the new IT systems, is a way of freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of contacts. You saw recently the very positive developments in the Arab countries. But at the same time, it can be misused. It can be misused by non-democratic government. But it can be also misused by people with bad intention who could misuse. And I'm just thinking concerning the people who will try to use this new way of communication to attract vulnerable people, and mainly young people. Do you know that unfortunately today, worldwide, 1 on 5 young kids above 18 years old has been or will be, I would say, a victim of a sexual abuse in the world. And today the number of cases followed by aggression, following contacts by internet, Twitter, Facebook or others is increasing. So this is a real concern for us. This is the reason why we think that we should launch campaign and method in the same way to let internet be free, free access, easy access for vulnerable people, but in the same time to protect the vulnerable people by the means you will probably find the right one. And I'm sure that this workshop will help for that. We have in the European Union and with the help of the Council of Europe promote a campaign with name Kiko campaign to explain to the kids and to their parents how dangerous it can be if there is not some information, protection and guidance on the use of internet. And I would like to probably member of the representative of Council of Europe are present and they could explain how good is this campaign. And what we have done in the European Economic and Social Committee is to make sure that this campaign will be first developed and promoted by the civil society, by organizations like employers, big companies, but also trade unions, but also small NGOs, local NGOs, parent association, internet friends association, and so on. And in the same time, the European Union draft a legislation for protecting the vulnerable people and mainly the children. And lastly, I would just say that this question is a question for all of us, all of you, of course, in Nairobi, but all of us. And this request, the engagement, deep engagement, of course, of the United Nations, which support this conference, of course, with bodies like Council of Europe, European Union, national government, but many of you, many of us, many of the civil society. And if we work together, we can have a world where internet will be seen as a tool for democracy, a tool for developing friendship and relationship among all the people, fight against racism, against discrimination, against nationalism, but in the same time, to be favorable, to be positive to vulnerable people and to give them this free access. And this is the world we want, and this is the world we can do together. So thank you for your invitation, and you have the full support of the European Union civil society. Merci beaucoup.
Well, this was our first recorded presentation of today's workshop. Our second presentation will come from Sala. I'm still not able to fully pronounce Sala's full name. I tried many times, almost a week when we met last time, a couple of weeks ago at the European Summer School in Meissen. Sala is from the Fiji, and she is a well-known expert on the legal and regulatory framework governing the area of commerce in the Pacific. And more details about her professional background you can find on the in the handouts of today's workshop. Please have a look at it afterwards. And Sarah, you have the floor now, please.
Well, it's a privilege to be here to speak to you. I bring greetings from the Pacific and Fiji. For those of you who don't know where Fiji is actually in the Pacific and otherwise known as Oceania. Yes, and we heard today from the first speaker that the internet is a catalyst for development, that it's a catalyst for growth. And in terms of the Fiji perspective, I will be bringing to you some of the challenges that we face back home. And one of the things that I suppose we'll see is that a lot of the challenges are actually pretty similar in terms of access. Things like access in terms of expensive retail internet costs, infrastructure. One of the things that Fiji actually is it's 300 islands scattered across the Pacific Ocean. So bringing infrastructure is quite a challenge, but moving on. I'd also prepared a presentation, and if you'd like to access it, you can actually ask Wolf after the session, and he'd probably show you. The reality is there have been studies conducted by the World Bank. I referred to one in 2008, where it showed there's 3 economists. They studied 120 developing countries. And what was shown was a 10% increase into broadband penetration led to a direct correlation in terms of a 1.38% jump in terms of GDP. If in terms of internet architecture in Fiji, we have a global submarine cable coming in and also a satellite, and there are around 5 ISPs in the country. And if you look at the penetration rates, internet penetration rates in terms of mobile penetration rate, fixed line penetration rate, and internet penetration rate, one of the things you'll find which is common for countries in the Pacific, Fiji particularly, is you'll see a steep rise in mobile. In fact, it's surpassed the 100% mark. But when we benchmarked it to the GDP, what we found between 2000 and 2010, it really did nothing for the GDP. Yes, it brought about communication, and people are able to, people in remote islands are able to access markets and that sort of thing. But the real challenge that underserved communities, and when I say underserved communities, these are people in remote islands who can't access either the internet, or people in urban areas who can access the internet, but retail internet prices are expensive. I referred to a session that was run yesterday in terms of the OECD report, where one of the findings was, for the first time, they've actually found empirical evidence to suggest the impact of IP transit costs on retail internet costs. And so one of the things that, one of the reasons why I'm addressing this is, the reality is we have marginalized communities in Fiji and around the world, and we have vulnerable groups who struggle with basic access. But what I would like to bring to the floor today, we know the challenges, but what is the solution? And which is why we're engaging in this robust discussion, and it'll be good to hear interactions and in terms of finding out what are some of the difficulties. Moving in terms of general ICT policy, what I'm finding in Fiji is, despite having an ICT policy, there's a general lack of capacity in some areas in terms of clear empirical analysis for people, for policy writers to clearly understand the issues. so that they can actually regulate better. And you would have heard from the opening statement yesterday, where there were speakers who spoke about having an open and free internet, where people are asking for not heavy-handed regulations, but moving towards a more light-handed regulations. And Fiji is a country where the regulatory regulations are very heavy-handed. Take, for example, the excess deficit, which is woven into our telecommunications promulgation, and it's supposed to last for 3 years and to be phased out. So when this is actually not given, what we see is there's no incentive for operators to actually move into increasing infrastructure into outer islands and that sort of thing. So it can really kill investments. And in the presentation that I prepared, if you can access it, perhaps after the session, you'll find what I prepared for you is a brief illustration on the regulatory structures in Fiji. And I think we share similar concerns with other post-colonial states, where you'll find that often departments act in silos, and because of that, there's a lack of cohesion. And at the end of the day, in countries which don't have a lot of resources to go around, at the end of the day, vulnerable groups are actually marginalized. So with that, I should hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salah. If I understood well, could we say that the vulnerable people or people in Fiji could become vulnerable because of the transportation problem, because they live actually so far away, and they could and there is a transport problem, so the ICTs or some ICT solution could help them to be more integrated in the society, in the public life, I would say. Could we say, is it right?
First of all, I'd like to say that ICT is dependent on energy, and energy means it's either petroleum, so it involves shipping, and if you can't power a site station, the reality is, or if you don't have fiber or access, so clearly they don't have access, But one of the things with ICT is it creates a phenomenon called the death of a distance, which means even if I'm in a remote island, if I'm accessing ICT, I can participate, I can talk to my MPs, I can, e-health, all that kind of things. But in terms of the issue in Fiji, I would say access and policy, cohesion in policy. And in terms of high retail internet prices, I think it would be good to have an IXP. Back to you, Yulia.
I think it's very important and a very interesting issue. For example, if we take France, well, I'm not sure that it will come like its first issue for vulnerable groups. So it's very interesting to share this experience. I would like now to invite Paul Hector from UNESCO, from the Information Society division, to share his experiences. Actually, Paul worked all over the world, in the Pacific countries and also in African countries, and with the number of vulnerable groups and categories of vulnerable groups. So he has an extended experience concerning this issue and the use of ICTs. So we discussed once with Paul, and he was telling me about very interesting initiatives developed concerning displaced people and ethnic in the areas of ethnic conflicts. So maybe, Paul, you could share this experience as well as the refugee camps e-learning programs. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Yulia. It's a pleasure to be here to participate in this discussion. And UNESCO has been and continues to be involved in a number of projects that address the needs of vulnerable persons. Just to highlight a couple of examples, in the area of, for example, persons with disability, in Ethiopia we have been working with the blind community to support the development of textbooks. We've also been working on text-to-speech tools. In the countries of Djibouti and Mali, we've worked with pastoralist communities. These are people who move from place to place, and providing, for example, educational radio and television services, and also library services, mobile libraries which are carried on backs of camels, for example. In Nepal and India, we've been working on including low-caste persons in the media space through community radio, and also making sure that gender-sensitive issues are highlighted. But what I like to talk about are two projects. which deal with people who are refugees. In one case, people fleeing from one country to another because of ethnic conflicts, and the second one, which looks at people who have been internally displaced because of natural disasters. The first one is the case of Haiti. As we know, last year, the 12th of January, there was a very huge earthquake in Haiti. We had something like 2 million persons losing their principal means of shelter, and so having to go to refugee camps. We had things like epidemics, etc. In terms of supporting a response, UNESCO provided, of course, clearly all of these persons, these 2 million who were displaced, they were became vulnerable. A number of responses were provided, but the one I'd like to focus on is the establishment of mobile multimedia centers. Six of the 1,300, there were 1,300 camps, which was really quite huge. But UNESCO decided to focus on 6 of them, and in those 6 camps, they targeted particularly young people and supported the means of blogging for them to share experiences, and also as a means of continuing their education, which of course had been disrupted due to the loss of schools, etc. I see the moderator nodding, so I guess I have to wrap up. Secondly, in Tanzania, this is a project which has actually been completed, which ran from around 2002 to 2009. You may remember there was a conflict in Burundi, and so because of this, many people fled from Burundi to the neighboring country of Tanzania to take shelter. The project focused on a region called Ngara, which is close to the border, and 3 community centers were set up, which had internet connection. Here you had 2 distinct groups of disadvantaged persons. The refugees who were fleeing the hostilities with just whatever they could carry. And then the second group were the people living in the town of Ngara, which is a remote town, and people there were very poor, but highly literate. You had something like 90% literacy rates. And so the intervention of providing internet services allowed that remote community to connect with people in, for example, the main centers, and then of course bring opportunities. In the case of the refugees living in a camp without anything to do, the internet services supported part of the educational development. So you had things like TVET programs for adults, and also educational programs for young people. I'll stop here and look forward to the question and answer session.
Can I ask you a question? I remember we discussed about the initiative made by UNESCO concerning blind people, and it was very interesting. Could you just shortly, like in few sentences, just maybe share this with the audience? I'm pretty sure that will be very interesting because it's a very, very good initiative from my point of view.
So one example, so one of the things that we did as far as the blind persons, we also supported one group in creating a newspaper in Braille, which addressed a number of social issues. So again, information about what's happening in society, and also things like, for example, HIV/AIDS, also talking about rights, benefits, etc., and disseminating this. And of course, as a blind person, being able to read content about what's going on in your daily life, this is a very empowering, feeling. And of course, with more information, you're better able to play an active role in your socio-cultural and also economic life of your society. Thank you.
Very interesting, and you just told about, actually we were speaking about displaced people, and unfortunately these displaced people, they can face some social problems. So I would like to move now to our panelists from Nigeria, Mr. Gbenga Cezanne. Where is Gbenga? I don't. Yeah. And he's the executive director of the civil society organization Paradigm. And actually, Paradigm, I also remember we discussing once, they work and develop a number of social projects concerning and in order to assist and to help people with social problems and low income. So maybe Gbenga, you could share this with us.
Thank you. Let me start. I know I have less than 5 minutes, so let me start with a story, a personal story. In 1998, I started writing a lot about the internet because, I mean, I was young, I heard about the internet, I heard about computers, and because it was new in Nigeria, I started writing about it. And what I realized was nobody would read it. I was sending it to the newspapers, I was sending it everywhere. Nobody would read it. But 2 years later, I met a professor in my department who said, okay, bring your article, one of your articles, and I gave it to him. He edited and said, hey, rewrite it again. And I did. And what he did was interesting. He posted this article online, and through that article being available on the internet, my message got out there, and I got an ITU fellowship to travel. I mean, my first time of living in Nigeria, which was a big deal for me at the time. Now, why am I telling this story? Because at the time, I was socially disadvantaged in terms of education, in terms of employment and other things, but simply because of placing one article on the internet, everything changed. And bringing it back to Nigeria today, things have improved a lot, but then there's still a few gaps. We have 44 million people online, which is about a third of the population of 150 million. We've got about 3.8 million young people, mostly young people on Facebook. You've got 90 million mobile phones, which is a huge number. But apart from the sites where we have the good news, which is mostly concentrated around the cities, we've got people who are in rural areas. By the way, 70% of Nigerians are within the rural areas. And even for those who are in urban areas, I'll give a very good example of a community where we work, which is called Ajegunle. Ajegunle is like Kenya's Kibera. It's the most notorious slum, and unfortunately, because Ajegunle is in Lagos, it has two disadvantages. Number one is the fact that it's a slum. Number two is the fact that it's already expected that the young people there have opportunities. And there are two huge problems. One is in terms of crime. I mean, there's a stereotype and there's reality of crime within the region. And the second is in terms of employment, unemployment actually. And so this is where I brought copies of this brochure here today, which basically talks about. There are a few copies just at the end of the table, and I hope it can go around. It basically tells a story of 20 young people who have gone through our training, and it's very basic. The idea is introduce them to ICTs, introduce them to how to use the internet to communicate with the rest of the world, to improve their skills, and that has changed the story. An average story you will read here is about a young person who was told by his mother, or who was told by her father, and the father said, well, you've gone through high school, and there's only enough money to do that. Why don't you stop and allow your younger brother, younger sister to also go through high school, and that's where your education ends, which brings a lot of which closes doors of opportunities to them. And what has happened now is because they now know how to use the internet, a lot of them have been able to expand the opportunity base and improve their livelihoods. And I'll stop here for now. But the interesting thing is, I mean, I gave my personal, example earlier, but this is what we see now, that regardless of the fact that these, guys and ladies may be excluded socially, there's a huge opportunity in them having access not only to the internet, but understanding how to use new technologies.
Thanks for this very interesting example and case elaboration about Nigeria working with vulnerable groups and trying to offer new opportunities for empowerment of these people. Our next speaker on the list is Rosemarie. Rosemarie is Executive Director of Africa Women and Child Feature Service, a media NGO focusing on the development of communication in Africa. Rosemarie is a communication specialist and expert on media, gender and development communication. Rosemarie, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. I'm going to give an example of how we've been working with the vulnerable women with the refugee camp in the northern part of Kenya. As an organization, we realized that information is power, and the fact that internet was able to actually narrow the bridge. We were cognizant of the fact that accessibility and, of course, infrastructure within that part of the country was not viable for them to be able to get information. So we partner with a UK organization called Free Play, whereby they gave us solar radio, and then we set up what we call radio listening group, which were 300 radio listening group, and each group was having 20 women, and within that we are able to connect with the issues that were affecting the women. And since the workers within the refugee camps in Dadaab and Kakuma were having access to information, we asked them to give us one person whom we could train to be able to link the issues of the women through the connectivity that they were having. So we organized them in the days that they were not busy, and this is between 10 and 11 o'clock, and also partner with the media, and the radio station we partner with is called the Star FM. So we had what we call multimedia connectivity between the community radio listening group, the FM station, and the internet. And as a result of that, we've been able to highlight issues that affect the refugee women, issues like trafficking of children from the refugee camps has received international attention. Even CNN has been able to get it from us. Apart from that, we have what we call community content radio, community content information center, and through that we partner with Pastoralist Journalists Association in the area, and we produce a bi-monthly newspaper called Reject. The name the Reject comes that the information that the mainstream rejected. So out of this, we are able to now be able to leapfrog women's issue using the internet into the global agenda. But what we have realized is that the use of internet has offered women kind of a free zone, a place where they can conduct and say what they want and at the time they want because of the convenience. So once the information is captured through the community radio, is fed within the internet, and also there's a feedback because it's a two-way forward from communication. And the internet enhances the freedom to have access to spaces other than the kitchen, also other than also the public spaces which they have. But the other challenge we have realized is that unless Kenyan women participate fully in the cyberspace, they'll face a new form of exclusion from the society. So there's need for us to, even though there's broadband thing being actually happening in this country, the infrastructure is making it that it can only be accessible within the urban countries, urban centers. But the rural communities where some of the women we work with, they do not access. The mobile phone, of course, has got almost 75% penetration, but they can only use it for just messaging and also mobile, what we call the M-Pesa, mobile money transfer. But in terms of engaging effectively, it's not viable. So we are looking at focusing on vulnerable community as a way of at least ensuring that access to information can be realized when we have meaningful connectivity through internet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. I think, as far as I can recall, we heard from several speakers like Paul and Rosemary that community radio and community media are quite important tools for communication with vulnerable groups. Many of these people are in many parts of the world still illiterate, so having access to written material would be rather difficult for these people, and therefore traditional community radio is still a very important tool of communication and access. And another term I heard from Rosemary was a multimedia connectivity. I think this multimedia connectivity is quite an important factor in this concept of empowering vulnerable groups in different parts of the world, as we have heard so far and today. The next message is a recorded one, as far as I know, Julia.
Wanted just, as we had just a presentation of Rosemary, maybe ask you one question. I remember you told me about the initiative ICT initiative you developed in order to support abused women. Do you have? Maybe you can say us a few things about this initiative.
Yes. In 2007, 2008, when Kenya, the post-election violence was taking place, we worked with the women who underwent, physical abuse, rape, among other things. And we partner with Urgent Action and the Nairobi Women Hospital, especially those who are HIV positive because of the ARV provisions. So we were able to also work with them to ensure that we highlighted wherever they were, using the mobile phones, and again, multimedia connectivity became a factor. So the doctors were able to actually be able to work with them to tell them how to take the medicine, and those who didn't have medicine, they were told where to get them. So as a result of highlighting their voices, the doctors in this country were able to realize that there was a vulnerable group within the women who are HIV positive who needed urgent action, especially access to medicine. So the way we used the internet and also the mobile phone as well as the radio was to make sure that the voices were highlighted, especially this vulnerable group, which at that time nobody thought of. Thank you.
So once again, it's about it's also about multimedia connectivity that you just told us about. Yeah, the next message we would like to present. It's a recorded message from John Cairns from UK, and John Cairns is the executive director of Partas Enterprise. And they work on the ICT development in order to assist and help migrants to integrate professionally in UK and in other EU countries. So he was unable to attend today, but he prepared a recorded message for us, and we will be able to send him questions or to discuss afterwards. So. We have here John.
Hello Nairobi, and to all of you gathered to look at the potential in using information and communications technology as an inclusion tool for vulnerable groups. My name is John Cairns and I'm the CEO of Partas in Dublin. And I wanted to share with you our experience of helping disadvantaged groups using all the tools available to us. In particular, I wanted to use a case study of one project, EU Imminent, to show the needs that exist in the immigrant community and how we used ICT as an aid to training and in turn integration. EU Imminent is an interactive business startup guide for immigrant entrepreneurs. It was a European Union Leonardo da Vinci funded initiative established to design and pilot a web-based information and training resource specifically for immigrant entrepreneurs. It was developed taking into account the specific needs of immigrants and ethnic minorities in establishing a business. The project was launched in October 2008 and ran for a total of 2 years, during which the team devised and compiled the online training program together with videos and exercises for potential entrepreneurs. Drawing on materials developed previously by other EU-funded programs, the project aimed to address the particular needs of immigrants in getting a new business off the ground. It aimed to directly complement face-to-face classroom training packages, providing additional support in compiling business plans, networking strategies, and other skills. The partner organisations were Banbridge District Enterprises in Northern Ireland, Canis Consulting also from Northern Ireland, IRF Schwerin in Germany, the Migrants' Rights Network in the UK, the Northern Chamber of Commerce in Poland, the Institute for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises in Romania, and my own organisation, Partas in Ireland. Partas has worked on many projects to counter the integration barriers faced by third country nationals and better assist their integration into the local society. Labour force activation measures have long been recognised as a means of helping to achieve social inclusion. This is even more true in the case of female immigrants, for whom isolation can deny both integration and activation. Training procedures which comprise local activation measures, supplemented by other customised localisation and familiarisation training, can achieve a double goal in assisting towards full societal integration, that goal of work readiness and integration. In our case, we used self-employment as the activation measure by which immigrants might achieve financial independence and better understanding of their new community. In addition, knowing the cultural and family situations in which many immigrants, again especially women, find themselves, we believed that access to online training, which could be followed through at each individual's own pace, was an important tool. We recognised that any actions taken to assist immigrants must be flexible, family-friendly and integrating. There are several categories of third country nationals: those with high skills and experience prior to migration, those seeking employment for the first time, and those returning to work, after several years' break, as well as short-term job seekers. Self-employment has always been an option favoured by immigrant women in particular, given the potential for flexible time commitments. And in many ways, self-employment gives women more options and may be more socially acceptable in certain communities. EU Imminent, as a partnership, offered expertise in both business and immigrant issues. It constituted an ideal platform for the development of a high-quality training tool for immigrant entrepreneurs. Our resource tool provides interactive information and training materials for new and existing businesses, consolidating current resources into one easily accessible vehicle. In effect, it is the perfect marriage of specific and particular needs and modern technology. Successful business startups require energy, innovation, and hard work. But for migrant entrepreneurs, many other factors also affect their ability to get enterprises off the ground. The shifting political and financial context, including the expansion of the European Union, the emergence of new migration patterns, and the international economic downturn, demand a fresh look at the challenges facing new migrant enterprises. Over the past century, businesses set up by migrant communities have made an increasingly substantial contribution to many national economies across Europe. States with significant ethnic minority populations, such as the UK, Germany, and Sweden, record a high level of entrepreneurial activity within these communities and a resulting contribution to national profit. In the UK, ethnic minorities are estimated to be 60% more likely to start their own business than the rest of the population, with those of Bangladeshi and Pakistani origin leading the way. And such businesses contribute approximately £15 billion to the British economy every year. Migrant-led businesses can range from community-based initiatives with minimal startup costs and low economies of scale, to international corporations with high turnover and staff. Many play a significant role in sharpening countries' competitive edge, shaping industries, and creating jobs. New research from the UK-based Work Foundation identifies immigrant entrepreneurs as critical in the development of the international knowledge economy, sharing expertise, skills, and ideas across borders. Many businesses founded by migrants tap into international markets, supporting technological and intellectual developments as a result. Immigrants are often referred to as natural and self-selecting entrepreneurs, demonstrated by their ability to take risks by moving abroad. On the positive side, starting up a business can increase people's confidence, sense of belonging, and self-esteem in a new country. Some migrants choose to start their own enterprise as an alternative to getting past the perceived or actual obstacles to employment in the mainstream job market. But the success of new migrants in the European business world is by no means a given, as substantial barriers can stand in the way of getting an enterprise off the ground. Low levels of knowledge about the local culture and language, for example, can limit migrants' ability to navigate the business environment, and particularly in getting through the red tape associated with startups. Low self-esteem can also be inhibitive, particularly for refugees likely to have experienced trauma or those migrants facing the insecurity of short-term immigration status. Being a new arrival can also make it more difficult to secure loans from banks and other lenders. And for some minority communities, securing mainstream funding can also be affected by cultural and religious beliefs. For example, the banking issues for many Muslims arising from the Islamic prohibition on lending money for interest. The increasing diversity of migrant communities living in Europe means that the business development patterns and support needs of those communities are highly differentiated. In particular, although recent migration flows have already made a significant contribution to national economies, there is still a broad absence of dedicated research into the needs of new migrant communities in starting up business. The partners in EU Imminent collectively completed a needs analysis among migrant communities in the participating countries through focus groups and in the participation of online questionnaires. Data was collected from a total of 120 participants, giving an indication of areas where particular support may be needed by migrant communities. Those needs varied depending on participating countries, but overall, the main areas where a need for targeted support was indicated included accessing business finance, preparation of effective business plans, sales and marketing techniques, and other business networking issues. Other barriers they encountered were competition, bureaucratic procedures, recognition of qualifications, individual expectations, communications and social skills, and access to information. Among the advantages they saw in embracing entrepreneurship, one key one was that they believed that entrepreneurship was a means of validation in their new country and a source of pride in their motherland. It was also a means of integration. Primary among their needs was that they can be somewhat lost when it comes to seeking advice and support in their new homeland. It appears to be a matter of potluck as to how they encounter and access advice and support. They have strongly voiced the need for a source of information and signposting that will be accessible and known about by all in their position. That source should be as comprehensive and as comprehensible as possible, given their lack of familiarity with their new business environment. No other tool is able to meet this need as easily and effectively as ICT. With the EU Imminent website up and running, we are widely promoting the resource in order to make sure that it reaches the target audience. EU Imminent now has its own Facebook page, providing a chance to develop a wider conversation about the opportunities and challenges faced by migrant entrepreneurs, and swapping information and links to other useful resources. May I finish by wishing you all a successful conference in Nairobi and a strengthened commitment to further development of internet use for the democratic participation of all vulnerable people into public life. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thanks a lot. This was a very comprehensive and interesting introduction about new accesses and approaches, how to work and with and how to empower migrant groups in different receiving countries. I think the traditional approaches proved to be rather inconsistent as far as I know the migration situation in Switzerland and as far as I know the situation in Germany. There are still, after decades, a lot of lacks and gaps which so far never could really be bridged, and I think ICT and new media offers quite a new potential for migrant and other vulnerable groups in the society, like migrant populations and groups. And as one of an example I can remember, I've observed over the years, traditional media and broadcasting system, print media and even public broadcasting, haven't favored the integration process of migrant population so much. And I think there is still a lot that could and need to be done in the next years, and ICT and new media, in my opinion, offer quite a new potential in this direction. Our next speaker on the list is John Carr. John Carr writes and consults about internet safety and security. I think in these circles it's almost useless to further introduce John, because he is well known over the years in this community. So I don't waste much of your speaking slot on the further introduction. As we said before, more details you can see on the papers, on the handouts of today's. And John, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here. I want to pick up actually on from a point that you made in your remarks in relation to the speaker before last about literacy. because it illustrates a wider and more important point, I think, which is this. Every conversation that I've taken part in, or almost every, not literally, but almost every conversation that I've taken part in around public policy in respect of the internet is based on an unspoken assumption that everybody who uses the technology is of average intelligence, average education, average numeracy, average literacy, reasonable eyesight, reasonable hearing in some cases, and of average dexterity in terms of their hands and ability to move their body in whatever way might be needed to use the device, the computer, the laptop, the console or whatever in question. Now that may have been true. It may have, I'm not certain it was true, but it may have been true in the early days of the internet when basically the only people who used it were scientists and academics in the research community or in universities and what have you. But now that the internet, more or less, certainly in many of the developed countries, reflects entirely the population of that country, we know very well that that is not true. We know that within all of our countries there are substantial numbers of people for whom that description does not apply, who can't read or can't write in their own language, let alone the language of the country that they're now living in, people who have got mobility issues, who have got issues of dexterity to manipulate a mouse or manipulate a mobile phone or things of that kind. And so we are, as it were, in relation to these types of vulnerable groups, we are still very much a fringe issue that the mainstream of the industry is not yet properly addressed. And I want to give two little sort of illustrations of the kinds of things that I've been dealing with in this space. First, the good news. The British government did a study of the effect on children's education of having ready and convenient access to the internet. Now that phrase, ready and convenient, is very important because tons and tons of people had access to the internet over a mobile phone, but when it comes to doing your homework in your house, in the evening, at the weekends, whenever, doing it on a mobile phone is not much use. You can't see the screen properly. Getting to understand the Roman Empire through a screen that's only 3 inches by 2 inches is not going to work. Writing an essay for your homework or your project is not going to work on a mobile phone. So the definition that we used for this study was ready and convenient access, and that basically meant at least a laptop or a computer with a proper size screen in your home. Because again, every library in Britain has got computers with internet access which are free for anybody who wants to use them, but if it's a wet night and Manchester United are playing football that night on the TV, there are lots and lots of reasons why kids ain't going to make the journey. And if you live in a remote part of the country, and although Britain by and large is a densely populated urban area, there are lots and lots of country areas and lots of areas where it's not so easy to move around. There are lots of reasons why you're not going to make that journey to the library or the internet cafe or whatever. So ready and convenient access at home was the criteria. And what the study showed, in some cases, kids who had ready and convenient access at home were gaining up to 2 grades advantage in their examinations in school at the end of the school year compared with children and young people who didn't have ready and convenient access to the technology. One of the consequences of this, of these findings was that the last government, you probably know we now have a new government, Conservative government, coalition government. The last government introduced a scheme called the Home Access Initiative, and they spent £300 million on it, and this was to try to ensure that every child of school age had a computer, a laptop or a desktop with an broadband internet connection at home, irrespective of their parents' ability to pay. Because when we did the studies, what we found was that poverty was the single biggest reason why children didn't have ready and convenient access to a computer at home with an internet connection. But it wasn't the only reason, not by any means. There were some families where the parents simply didn't understand the significance or the potential usefulness of the internet to their child doing their homework and so on. And there were some religious groups who had misgivings and reservations about it. But overwhelmingly, the truth was it was about poverty. So the government created this scheme called the Home Access Initiative. I was on the steering group that put it together. My particular responsibility was for the security aspects of the scheme. And as I say, they spent £300 million giving out these machines. There was a lot of training involved for the teachers in the schools and things of that kind, because suddenly teachers were in the classroom were confronted with a situation where every child now, potentially at any rate, could be allocated projects to do using the internet. Up till then, they couldn't assume that, because if you're a teacher in a school, you couldn't then assume that every child had the same access to the internet at home. So they were constructing lessons in a rather kind of schizophrenic way, in a way that suggested that kids didn't have access to the internet because some of the kids didn't. So the idea was to bridge that digital divide and bring every child up to the same sort of level. Another reason, by the way, why we thought, and I work overwhelmingly with children's organisations, why we thought this was very important, because apart from the educational aspects involved, if you were the only kid in the class that didn't have a computer at home, you were the only kid who wasn't on Facebook, you were the only kid who wasn't keeping up with stuff going on, you were easy to identify as the poor kid, the kid with the stupid parents, or the kids from the socially disadvantaged background. So it was not just an educational thing, there was also social implications to it as well. So there were two aspects to this program. Now, the new government, by the way, can you wave your hand when I've got about 2 minutes left, because I'm useless at timekeeping. The new government, which is a Conservative government, has decided to kill that program because of it's killing all kinds of public expenditure projects. But it preserved it for one group of children. It's preserved it for children with disabilities, children who haven't, who are classified as having special educational needs. So although you won't qualify now for a free computer with free broadband simply on the grounds that your parents are poor, if you can show that if you can show you're poor and you've got some learning disability or physical disability of some kind, the program still exists. And we were very, very pleased that the new government recognised the legitimacy and the value of that original scheme by continuing it in this way. I want to now talk very briefly, very, very, very briefly, because they just waved his hand, about a particular project that I did with kids who were very, very severely disabled. And I know you might think I'm a hard-looking guy and I've seen everything and I've done everything, but this was one of those occasions when I was brought to tears by what I witnessed this particular day. I worked for an organisation that ran residential schools for children with severe disabilities. People couldn't walk, some of them, they couldn't talk or communicate in any way, had all kinds of mobility issues, dexterity issues. We put a lot of money into developing IT schemes specifically for these children, and the effect was absolutely tremendous. I can remember being in the room one day when a parent came into the school and their child was there using a pointing stick that was attached to his head, bashing out a message and making a picture with a video camera that was attached to the computer, and telling their mum what they'd been doing at school that day. That was the first time in that family's life when that child had been able to communicate in that kind of personal and intimate way about something that they had done that day in their life. The mother was crying, the teachers were crying. It was truly a tremendous thing, and it illustrates a very important point about the technology. It is a technology of liberation. It is a technology can expand children's horizons and possibilities, particularly from these vulnerable groups, in ways that were unimaginable not all that long ago. But, and this is literally my last sentence, we also know from many studies that have been done that needy children, vulnerable children also can be subject to forms of abuse and exploitation that don't exist for other groups. So you have to also think about that side of things, think about that aspect when you introduce these schemes, because we don't want the technology simply to be a gateway to abuse and exploitation.
Thank you so much, John. I would like actually to pick up your last sentence, and could you please, like, really in a few sentences, share with us the initiative concerning the assistance of exploited children? I remember you developed an ICT program in order to assist them how to report. Is it right?
Yeah, we in the UK now, although I'm here representing a European-wide NGO, in the UK we have a single button. In fact, it's run by the police. It's linked. The police created it, but with our cooperation and support, to enable any child to report abuse. And you click on the button, and it then takes you instantly to a menu of different organisations. If you're feeling suicidal or depressed, there's a link straight to the Samaritans. If you've seen what you think is illegal content, there's a link straight to the hotline. So there's a range of different organisations. If you're being bullied, there's a link straight to bullying is a big issue for children with disabilities and vulnerable groups of that kind. There's a link straight to a bullying organisation. So we put this menu of different things together to make it easier for children to report abuse or to report issues and get help. Suicide websites, that's been a bit of an issue from time to time. They're all there. The site, by the way, is called www.thinkyouKnow.co.uk, and we've encouraged all of the big websites to put that button on their own website as well, so we can get some uniformity about children shouldn't have to learn a whole new vocabulary every time they go to a new website simply to be able to report that they're in trouble. There should be some uniformity in the presentation of that type of thing.
I remember, John, you just told me that I found this very interesting, that when the children, they can go to this website to report, actually, for example, the violence case, and if it was done by one of the family members, actually the family members can't accede to this information. Is it right? Something?
Yeah. In the UK, we have an organisation called Childline. Every kid knows it. Everybody knows. It was originally a telephone-based service, 0800 1111. It's on every telephone box, or virtually every telephone. Everybody knows Childline. You can also now go to Childline over the internet, but it's set up in such a way that, because if it's your mum or your dad that's abusing you, or your big brother or somebody, you don't want them to know necessarily by looking at the history folder in your browser that they've been to that website. So it automatically wipes any trace or history of you having visited it. So this is to allow children to feel confident that if they go to the website to report something, nobody will be able to find out that that's what they've done.
I found personally the initiative very interesting, and actually we touched a little bit now the subject of exploited children and exploited persons, and I would like to move now to the legal perspective, to the legal part, and to discuss how we could legally protect and assist vulnerable groups of people, but also could we say that these vulnerable people, once using internet, they are more fragile concerning internet dangers. So I would like to go to Professor Marco Gerke with the Cybercrime Research Institute and the University of Cologne, and could you please maybe share your experience and the view on this?
Thank you very much, Julia, for the invitation. There were so many good examples of approaches to help vulnerable people that were presented here today that my topic seems to be rather irrelevant. I'd like to share two things with you, two short aspects of the point of criminalization. And I would like to speak about vulnerable people as victims. That was already mentioned by John, and in the last years, John and I are almost saying the same things. So I'd like to speak about vulnerable people as victims of crimes on the internet, and the other thing is as offenders, and what are the consequences. John already mentioned on the point of victims that vulnerable people are a target group that are specifically targeted by offenders. We see that a number of people, vulnerable people, did not build up the protection instruments that others do. So we see people, especially among minors, that have developed skills to protect themselves against threats related to the internet. And we've seen that others didn't. And especially vulnerable people tend to belong to the group that did not build a protection. So therefore the ability to prevent crime, which is more important than fighting crime. So if you can prevent crime, you can stop people from being harmed. So the ability, and this can include legal measures to prevent crime, and if you cannot prevent it, to at least investigate crime and make sure that the same offender is not committing further crimes, is a very important aspect when we want to protect vulnerable people. So therefore, it is certainly a comprehensive approach that is necessary, coming from educational aspects to legislation and enforcement. And the topics that I'm covering as a law professor are really limited. However, I think it is important that we include this in the debate. And the second point I would like to mention is vulnerable people as offenders. Because when we look at crime statistics, and I don't necessarily really believe in crime statistics, but if you look into the crime statistic, they indicate that among the offenders, especially minor offenders that are committing internet crimes, there is a significant number of vulnerable people itself that are using this technology. They sometimes don't actually see what they're doing. For example, participating in a denial of service attack is rather easy. You download a software, you press a button, and all of a sudden you're participating in such an attack. Many of the minors believe that this is cool, they can be part of a group, part of people that change something. However, it is a criminal act. And what I believe we need to do is we need to make sure that when we start criminalizing conduct on the internet, we should be aware that there should be no over-criminalization, as it could cut off people from using the internet. And I'm not only speaking about arresting people, but we've seen a couple of countries that decided that one of the sanctions that could be introduced with regard to people that committed internet crimes is to cut them off the internet. So when you do things like, one of the things that was discussed was copyright violations, and the point that was raised was, if you are committing such a crime, your internet connection can be completely blocked. That means you cannot communicate anymore. And I believe that this is a wrong development. I think the internet access for vulnerable people is an important thing, for minors in general, and we should make sure that the sanctions that we're introducing and the conduct that we're criminalizing does not lead necessarily to an over-criminalization. As Germany was mentioned several times here, statistics indicate that around a quarter of the German population and around half of the internet users are using file sharing systems and are downloading copyright protected material from the internet. That would be a significant number of offenders in the country, and the question is whether we really want to go this way and say we criminalize a quarter of the society, or whether we have to come to a different approach and try to think about alternative strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Marco, could I ask you, do you think we can speak about the need of legal framework for vulnerable people in order to protect or to fight against all possible abuses?
I think within an approach of protecting vulnerable people, there might be legal measures necessary. However, when it comes to internet crime and things like this, I think we should have a technology-neutral approach, and as well gender and age-neutral approach. So I don't see that there is any need to implement specific legal measures. I think it is more in the question of enforcement and sanctions where we have to look into this.
Thank you, Marco. Before going to the discussions with the audience and sharing our experiences and discussions, I would like, I don't know if we have still time, just quickly share one initiative that we developed in cooperation with the Council of Europe and the City of Strasbourg, and it was mainly how to involve vulnerable children from schools situated in socially distressed and disadvantaged areas in the public life, and specifically in the area of internet and information society. So we organized in May of this year the first French Youth and Teenagers IGF Forum in order to give them, to these vulnerable children, the possibility to be their voice heard. And so they prepared a message to the information society leaders, and we made afterwards a video clip, of very short one. So I would like now to share this with you, to show the clip, and afterwards go to the discussion and to answer questions. So. just 1 minute to... Okay, so we are here.
After all the exciting presentations, contributions we have heard in this workshop from different parts of the world, from different areas, from different interpretations of vulnerability and what could be defined as a vulnerable group, I think this may differ from country to country, and there is no stereotype or standardized access or approach to this. After all these interesting contributions, I would now like to open the floor for further questions and comments. Okay, take the mic.
Thank you. My name is Andrei Sherbovich from Russia, Moscow Higher School of Economics. First, let me thank you for the all interesting presentations, especially the last one, video presentation. As an ex-UN modelist, I think that raising awareness among youth and school children concerning the internet governance issue are really important. The other issue I would like to say that we have different definitions of vulnerability, groups. So we are in the same place. We are talking about women, children, migrants, and other. I think that the problem is much more wider. Because we should differentiate approaches among these groups. The other issue is I would like to raise is the issue of the information culture and legal culture of internet users. For example, in some segments of the internet, we could say that the information culture or the absence of the information culture could be in the one hand for raising vulnerability of the groups of people. I would like just to have one example. If honorable colleagues said that they have websites helping to prevent suicides. In Russia, we have websites which assisting in suicides. This is a real website when indicated 150 methods of committing suicide in home of home base. So this is open content. And so I'd like to raise the issue of the information culture of the internet users, which is very important in issue of assisting vulnerability groups. Thank you very much.
Have other comments, and especially I would like, could you maybe answer the question, what to do next? What can be the solution in order to assist these vulnerable people? Of course, as you mentioned, and it's very right, we didn't discuss all groups of vulnerable people, all categories. We tried just to pick and to see what are the, like, would say, the category of vulnerable people in this or another one region. But of course, what can be the solutions?
Hi, thanks to all the presenters and organizers. It's very interesting for me. I come from the women human rights movement, so it's very interesting listening to some of these discussions and trying to make connections. I work with a transnational campaign called Violence is Not Our Culture, which works on issues around violence against women, especially in Muslim majority contexts. We work in Asia, Africa, and in diaspora communities. And the issue of freedom of information, freedom of assembly is very interesting to us, so this is kind of the intersection. One thing I wanted to highlight is that looking at strategies and initiatives, very important to integrate a gender perspective, not only around issues of women's rights and women as vulnerable communities, but also when looking at issues of migrants, looking at issues of children as well, you know, because I think while social and economic factors are often taken into account around access, the issue of culture is not always. And, you know, a house could be wired, but based on gender roles and household economy, who's using those technologies and in what ways? I just want to share one example that sort of relates to this discussion around children as a vulnerable group. Our partners in Senegal launched a campaign earlier this year around FGM, the issue of female genital mutilation, called Children Protect Themselves. And they worked with school children, both boys and girls, between the ages of 5 and 14 years old, to do a bit of capacity building training on how to use the internet to find out what their rights were in the national framework and international framework, and how to create online petitions and email their local members of parliament. And these children have now gone on to set up a Google group so they can discuss amongst themselves around these issues. So I think this issue of building capacity of vulnerable groups, including children, to be able to protect themselves, so it's more a bottom-up approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have also one comment here.
Thank you. Sylvie Nyombo from Congo. I just would like to say that in case we don't have access to internet in some areas of the countries, what we used to do in Congo in a project to support women victims of violence against women is that we have trained them to create digital stories and audio stories where they will express themselves and what they have experienced, and these stories are being screened and used by other organizations in the countries to raise awareness on violence against women. And we've also had a project on mobile use of mobile phone to prevent sexual harassment in schools with young girls. So we send information on the legal aspect on how to protect themselves, and we have also information on how they could get support services. So they report on the several cases. And I will just add to emphasize on capacity building, because it's very important. It's not just about training on the use of internet, but also how they could protect themselves, what does it mean for them, and how especially the girls in the schools could use internet for their empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I think, do you have other comments?
Yes, we have one, two more.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Frank LaRue, and I'm the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression. I'm very pleased to have come to this panel. I think it's very important. I work on many of the issues here on children's rights, youth rights, violence prevention. But one of the issues that was raised here, and I think that internet can actually be one of the most empowering instruments if we get it to the people. My report to the General Assembly is precisely on access, coming up on October 21st, because it was mentioned before, the biggest vulnerability is poverty. And although I work in many sectors, and I do work on violence against women, and I work on violence against children, and street violence of young people, but poverty is still one of the biggest causes of all the other issues, and an enormous degree of also the lack of education and the lack of information. So one of the ideas that I think we really have to push is the obligation of all states to guarantee access to content, precisely the capacity building that our friend was mentioning in terms of illiteracy, but also how to use the content there, how to have prevention policies, and how to be able to do that, but also access to the infrastructure. This in Europe may not sound terribly important, or in North America. I come from Guatemala, from a Latin American country, and in developing nations it certainly is. The poorest villages do not even have internet service, let alone connectivity. So I think it's very important that we build into Millennium Development Goal number 8 the idea that all states and the international community should feel responsible of granting access, universal access for everyone to enjoy equal rights. Otherwise we will make internet part of the digital divide and sort of the benefit of very few people.
Thank you very much, Mr. LaRue, for this additional comment and for the announcement of your next report. We have one more
yes, maybe we
from
have really like 1-2 minutes, and we have to conclude because we have another session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Sabrina Kijali. I represent here the Council of Europe, and especially the program targeting children and young people, building Europe for and with children. So to answer the question which was said and raised is how can we assist vulnerable groups, in particular in that case children and young people. I would say that the Council of Europe adopts 3 main approaches which I wanted to share with you. The first one is the legal framework that was raised and addressed earlier. The Council of Europe has been developing a wide range of standards for the public at large, but also targeting more vulnerable groups and children in particular. We have a convention, for instance, fighting sexual abuse and sexual exploitation of children, which takes into account the development of certain technologies and their use, such as their grooming, so that is soliciting children on the internet, and how to tackle that. Another aspect is capacity building, as it was said earlier, and here's the idea of trying to raise awareness of children and young people by showing that they need also to adopt a responsible behavior on the internet for themselves and towards others, because as one participant said, you can be both, as a vulnerable group member, a victim but also an offender. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we can conclude now on this on the concrete solution actually that you brought to us, and maybe as my personal point, as a beginning of the solutions could be, we can maybe just raise a kind of mailing list if people who are here agree, and just in order to share initiatives, to exchange our ideas, and maybe to conclude what can be the next steps. So if you just want to join us and to leave your the person who are interested in your email address, we will set a mailing list and communicate after this workshop. So thank you so much for attending this workshop, and have a great continuation of the IGF forum. Thank you.